FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's October 17th, 2017. It looks like we're actually going to make it to the new year. There were times where perhaps you might have had some doubts. I know I did. Well, there's a lot of doubts about a lot of things going on. Recently, President Trump called into question the whole Iranian agreement. Wasn't a treaty, never went to the Senate, but it is being adhered to, perhaps not much longer. On that subject, we're really pleased to have Pamela Geller with us. If you want to find Pamela on the web, PamelaGeller.com or GellerReport.com. And hey, if you have any questions for Pamela or myself, email us, kl@kerrylutz.com. And recently, Pamela, you've written a lot of books and you've been very active on the subject of jihadism in the U.S. and around the world, which has led to a lot of confrontations for you, a lot of blowback, and a lot of threats to your safety, too, I'd imagine. It's no wonder you're referred to as the Joan of Arc of the counter-Jihad movement. And we're really happy and thrilled to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So if you had to sum up the threat, and the threat that you outline in your new book, Fatwa, Hunted in America, what is the nature of the threat?
Well, the nature of the threat to this country is the gravest and, most serious threat to our freedoms, our liberty. In the Red-Green Alliance, the leftist Islamic alliance, a very, very dangerous power axis. My book, Fatwa, Hunted in America, is my story. An American in 21st century America living under constant death threat. A number of fatwas. Fatwa, for your listeners who may be unfamiliar with it, is a legal ruling issued by a recognized authority under Islamic law. And it's a death sentence by a recognized authority. And I've had a number, but of course the most serious was the fatwa issued by ISIS, by the Islamic State. And there have been multiple assassination attempts on my life. Many will be familiar with the Garland, Texas free speech event that I held where 2 jihadists opened fire, hoping to slaughter as many people as possible, much the way he did in Vegas. And then as we speak in Boston, there's a trial ongoing right now, the ringleader of a Muslim plot to behead me. The ringleader is currently being tried. I'll be going up there at some point to make a victim's impact statement. So this is something that's ongoing. There are no expiration dates on fatwas, as we saw most horrifically in the case of Charlie Hebdo, the French Paris Weekly, satirical weekly, whose cartoonists, editorial staff, and journalists were slaughtered in cold blood. And what's interesting is that just a couple of days after the Hebdo bloodbath, Muslim leaders in this country got together in Garland, Texas, not to stand in support of the freedom of speech like one would imagine American moderate Muslims would do. Instead, they held a conference called the Stand with the Prophet Conference in support of the ideology behind that mass slaughter, in support of the Sharia, the speech restrictions on our First Amendment rights. And that's why I chose to hold a free speech event in Garland, Texas, in that same venue where Muslim leaders stood in support of the ideology behind that bloodbath. And of course, as you know, jihadists tried to kill us. And the left-wing media, who's been aligned with the jihad force now for years, they scrub, censor, and stand with the jihadists, blamed me, much the way you might blame a rape victim for wearing a skirt. So there are really very deep problems. It's not just the violent jihad, which I explain in my book, and what it's like to live under constant death threat with 24-hour security required, with no help, by the way, from the government, unlike, for example, the UK, where when Salman Rushdie was under a fatwa by the Ayatollah Khomeini, Margaret Thatcher called him to 10 Downing Street, and they were on completely opposite sides of the political fence. He was a, liberal, and she was a conservative, and he was vicious in his political attacks on her, as typically the left is vicious. And she called him down and said, listen, I understand that we're on different political sides of the fence, but this supersedes party. This is, this is an issue of freedom. And she provided him with, I think to this day, the government is protecting Salman Rushdie. Yeah. So it's just interesting. It's interesting how the threat is perceived and handled here in America. We know the FBI was at my event. 60 Minutes did a piece on it. FBI was following the jihadists in the car. They got out of the car, took cell phone footage. They knew about the event. They were in on the planning. They did not warn us. They did not have anyone there to protect us. It was my security team that took out the jihadists. If I didn't have my security team there, if I didn't have SWAT there, Americans would have been slaughtered in cold blood, like San Bernardino and Chattanooga and Pulse in Orlando.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we see this repeatedly. So I think that Americans are much like Helen Keller. Someone moved the furniture. They are painfully unaware. They need to read this book, Fatwa, because frankly, I'm but a proxy in this terrible long war. What has happened to me is what happens in small and in large ways to every American who takes this stand, who stands for freedom.
Yeah. So, you've been fighting this fight for a long time. I think you kind of got awoken by 9/11. And do you feel like you're losing it at times, or do you feel like there's just no way to get through to people to make you understand the threat that you're under?
Well, I mean, look, it was much worse, clearly under President Obama, who a week after Benghazi stood before the world and said, the future does not belong to those who slander the prophet. I mean, he sounded like a Muslim leader, to be honest with you. This is, the First Amendment is the bedrock of a free society. Freedom of speech is fundamental to a free society, otherwise a tyrant can wreak havoc unopposed. So it's critical. I am hopeful with Trump, although clearly there's been a clampdown on, social media because they blame us for his win. They were shocked by it. But I am hopeful because he was elected and people are waking up, but they need to be armed in the information battle space. And that's why my book is so crucial.
Perhaps in the information battle space and in your everyday life, because these things happen, Pamela, and obviously in Las Vegas, there's nothing that could be done. There's a madman in a tower. Who knows what his motivation is, although I wonder about the explanations, but not to dabble in conspiracy hypotheses.
Well, it's not conspiracy hypothesis because ISIS has never taken credit for events that are not theirs. So this idea that the FBI has dismissed it so out of hand and so casually is deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
They took credit for the Sinai jetliner, the Russian jetliner in the Sinai, and everyone poo-pooed it and said, "Oh no, they're being opportunistic." But in fact, a few weeks later, they released photos of the bomb, and then of course the Western authorities and Middle Eastern law enforcement had a backpedal with their tail between their legs.
Yeah.
And back in June, Resorts World in the casino in the Philippines, they took credit for that. Authorities said it wasn't ISIS. And again, we find that it was sanctioned, if not directed by ISIS. Clearly, the most obvious motive, there is no number 2 and number 3 and number 4, is the Islamic State. They're not even looking at it. Instead, they're latching on to, in my opinion, really nutty theories like he took a couple of Valium over the past, 18 months. The idea that he had a prescription of 50 pills and took 20 over the course of 1,500 days, it's just absurd.
Yeah.
It's really scary. This is our law enforcement, and the fact that they have nothing after close to 3 weeks, I think is a stunning indictment to their cluelessness or their complicity. Either one is unforgivable.
Yeah, well, I'm inclined to agree with you. I wonder if this guy really was involved. He's got a really shadowy past. He supposedly made $5 million in 2015 playing video poker. At least that's what his tax return said. Now, I know a lot of people who played video poker for more money than him, and none of them ever became millionaires from it. The old saying in Vegas, how do you make a small fortune? Start with a big one. So there's something about this guy that's just not right. He moved around. He had weird jobs with the government.
He made multiple trips to the Middle East. His girlfriend had family in Dubai. A number of his financial transactions, his foreign financial transactions were flagged for possible covert terrorism financing. Look, I mean, there's some smoke there. And this horrific, barbaric, there's not a word for it, okay, of Americans who are enjoying their lives at a country music festival, a country music concert. It's just unforgivable. And you notice how the media, I mean, they're still talking about Charleston, but they're not talking about Vegas.
No, the media, today's contemporary media, Pamela, is what I call, they specialize in disconnecting the dots. That's what they do best. They're not out to figure anything out. There's no skepticism. There's no curiousness or just a desire to get to the bottom of stories anymore. They're completely, maybe, like you said, complicit in the whole thing. So what do you do as an individual, like, who feels you're under threat? What do you do? How do you make things, make your life still work? How do you go on?
Well, it's not so complicated. I mean, we know the media is in the tank. There's a leftist Islamic alliance. They won't discuss this subject matter candidly, forthrightly, or honestly. So you have to leapfrog over the media. You have to go to sites like mine, GellerReport.com or PamelaGeller.com, where I update with news the media will not report on. Jihad across the country, across Europe, across the world. You have to share those links. You have to share those articles, those stories. You have to educate those around you. First, learn everything. And the best way to do that is to start with this book at the very least. Read what happens to an American in 21st century America. Share the stories on social media. Educate those around you. We need to build an army of Davids against this enormous machine, this Goliath. But listen, if history has taught us anything, it's that the individual can change the course of human events. So get involved, get active, and go to work.
Yeah, and look, you're an extremely brave person, Pamela. You've learned to live with a constant fear hanging over your head. Did you ever think when you were growing up that this would be your life? No,
but growing up, I grew up free. I was completely and utterly free. And I was one of 4 girls, and my sisters are doctors. We did everything we wanted. This idea now about women's rights and being held down is just so absurd on its face. It's the left, again, another protected class, and more victimization. Anything I wanted to be, I went out and did. Even when I was a kid, they talked about an equal rights amendment. I didn't get it. I was like, why do I need something that I already have? Why do I need an amendment to something I already have? I just, again, this is what the left does. It makes victims out of the aggressor. It makes victims out of the oppressor. By the way, that's exactly what the Nazis did. They always fashion themselves as the victims of the Jews and so on and so forth. So, I mean, look, this is the template. This is the war in the information battle space. You can't complain about it. All is fair in love and war. You have to fight. End of story. And so I know what I'm fighting for. I lived a free life. I know what it's like to be free. And I know how precious, it's the most precious gift of all. And I have no intention of having our future generations not live with the same basic freedoms that we were, endowed with. And this is an unalienable right. And I will, Patrick Henry,
right.
Give me liberty or give me death.
Sure.
It's just that simple. It's not complicated.
Yeah. So when people say, well, I'm looking at your Wikipedia entry, which is absurd anyway, but fine. But you lead an anti-Muslim hate group, according to the biggest hate group of them all, the Southern Poverty Law Center. I mean, you're like slandered, libeled constantly, and it's got to be frustrating.
Well, no, it's what they do. They make monsters of us, because if you smear, defame, and libel a human being, no one is going to listen to their message. I mean, they're not going to debate the message, because I will win in the war of ideas. I will win in the information battle space, unquestionably. The left cannot stand up to scrutiny. Leftist ideology cannot be challenged. They will lose every time. So what they do is they make a monster out of you. I went from being this New York City career girl to the country's most notorious racist, Islamophobic, anti-Muslim bigot.
Yeah.
I mean, Islam is not even a race, but it doesn't matter, you see. It doesn't matter. These labels, they stick. And then they stick until somebody stands up and they too are called a racist, Islamophobic, anti-Muslim bigot. And then everybody who voted for Trump is a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, racist, Islamophobic, anti-Muslim bigot until it becomes absurd.
Yeah.
And people begin to see through the art of the smear, and that's what this is. These are smear tactics. This is a smear campaign. In Muslim countries, they assassinate you for violating the Sharia. In Western countries, they assassinate your character. They murder your good name. They drag your name through the mud. And so this is what we're fighting, and it has to be fought. That's all there is to it.
What choice? And your partner in the American Freedom Defense Initiative, Robert Spencer, he's been on the show as well. And, what he describes exactly the same thing as you, being barred from traveling to certain countries and under constant threat. So I really admire the fact.
Yes, that was my ban as well. I have been banned from the UK.
Yeah.
That was a trip that I had arranged. Mr. Spencer was joining me. We were going to speak. I had asked him to join me and speak at a memorial for a young father, a soldier, who was beheaded in broad daylight on the street outside of London. And we were going to lay a wreath on Armed Forces Day. And we were banned from entering the UK. Never advocated for violence, always advocated for freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, individual rights, and equality for all before the law. And yet the UK lets in these vicious Muslim hate preachers that call for, the slaughter of the Jews, call for the slaughter of the infidel, call for holy war, call for jihad. They are welcome to speak at universities. I mean, you can go to YouTube and watch a Hannity show where there's a devout imam on television calling for my death and my execution. This is the world we're living in.
Yeah, remarkable. Really, really remarkable. Well, the one thing we do have in the United States, whether you believe in it or not, or practice it, is the Second Amendment, which I think does put a damper on some of these attacks that might otherwise occur.
Yes, absolutely.
So I guess we should be grateful for that. Well, Pamela, just tell us again where we find you and your book.
You must get the book at fatwabook.org. That's fatwabook.org, or go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Buy it. This is not a book that any publishing house would publish. It's on dangerous books. They were afraid that their publishing house would get blown up. This is how cowardly and uniformly leftist our publishing houses are. Media, academia, music, movies, the zeitgeist. We have to fight back. And by supporting dangerous books and supporting my work, you're making a statement. And I strongly recommend that your readers do that, your listeners do that. And also subscribe to the website. You'll get news the media will not cover, and it's free. Just go to GellerReport.com or Pamela Geller, that's GELLER.com as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, and thank you, and keep up the fight. Good luck.
Thank you.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.